In the autumn of 1888, a series of brutal murders in the East End of London lit a flame that sent shockwaves reverberating around the civilized world and caused a scandal that struck right at the heart of the British establishment.
Although Abberline and his colleagues were convinced that they were dealing with a lone assassin, their investigation was hampered by the very nature of the crimes and by the fact that his victims were all prostitutes. He struck in the dead of night in out-of-the-way places. As far as can be ascertained, there was no motive aside from the grim satisfaction of mutilating his victims. He was able to prevent those victims from crying out and thus alerting attention to their plight. He left no clues behind him, nor was there an accomplice to inform upon him. And the fact that his victims were prostitutes meant they would take him to the very places where they knew that they were safe from interruption. As one police officer put it, it's not as if he has to wait for his chance, they make that chance for him. At 1 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of September, Louis Diemschutz turned his pony and cart into Duffield Yard off Berners Street. As he did so, his pony suddenly shied up in alarm and pulled away to the left. Something had disturbed it. Looking down, Diemschutz could just about discern a dark shape lying on the ground by the wall. Jumping from his cart, he struck a match to get a better view. It was very windy and the match was extinguished almost immediately. But in the brief seconds flickering light, he saw the bundle was in fact the prone form of a woman. He had discovered the body of Elizabeth Stride, Jack the Ripper's third victim.
Elizabeth Stride, also known as Long Liz in the area, some historians call her Lucky Liz because she only had her throat cut. There was no anatomical mutilation, so it's only a throat cut.
And this led the police to surmise that he'd been interrupted as he went about his bloody business. Is it possible that as he commenced the mutilations on Elizabeth Stride, the pony and cart turned into the yard and disturbed him? Did he jump back into the shadows? And was it that sudden movement that caused the pony to shy up and pull away to the left? And then crucially, in the days that followed the murder, a witness came forward who may well have seen Elizabeth Stride in the act of being murdered.
Israel Schwartz turned into Berners Street and he was walking just a short way behind another man. And up ahead was a woman standing in the gateway of a socialist club. And he saw this man approach the woman. They exchanged words. Then there was an altercation. He was violent with the woman. He threw her to the ground. Israel Schwartz crossed the road and walked on, trying to get away from what he thought was a piece of domestic violence going on. He subsequently identified the body of Elizabeth Stride, and the probability is that the man that he had followed up the street was the person who killed Elizabeth Stride. So he probably saw the murderer.
As the body of Elizabeth Stride was being discovered, a prostitute by the name of Catherine Eddowes, who had earlier been arrested for drunkenness, was being released from Bishopsgate Police Station. As she left the building, she turned to a police officer and spoke her last recorded words. "Good night, old cock," she called, and went off into the night. A little after 1:30 a.m, 3 Jewish gentlemen, Joseph Lawender, Joseph Levy and Harry Harris, left the Imperial Club on Duke's Place in the City of London. They noticed a man and a woman standing on a nearby corner. "I don't like going home by myself when I see those characters about," Levy observed to Harris. Lawender, meanwhile, was walking slightly apart from the others, and being closer to the couple, observed a little more. He was later emphatic that the woman he had seen was Catherine Eddowes. The man, he said, was aged about 30. His height was between 5'7" and 5'8". He had a fair complexion and a fair moustache. He was of medium build and had the appearance of a sailor. But since the couple seemed to be just chatting quietly and there was nothing otherwise noteworthy about them, the 3 men continued on their way.
It's entirely possible that Joseph Lavender did see the Ripper, but he only got a very brief glance at the man, and it wasn't even totally certain that the man he saw was talking to Catherine Eddowes.
At 1:45 in the morning, PC Watkins of the City Police walked his beat here into Mitre Square. The only noise he heard was the sound of his own footsteps. He'd walked this way 15 minutes previous and found the square to be quite deserted. Little now seemed to have changed as he shone his lantern into the square's dark recesses. But when the beam fell upon the spot in the square's south corner, it illuminated a horrific sight: the mutilated body of Catherine Eddowes.
The injuries that Catherine sustained were really horrific in Mitre Square. She had her throat cut from left to right back to the spinal column. The murderer then ripped her up to the breastbone, disemboweled her, took away her kidney. He then placed her intestines over the shoulder. But not only that, to her body he actually disemboweled her, of course, which happened to most of the victims, but it was her facial injuries which were sort of really notorious, because he cut off the section of her nose, he partially severed her ear, he slashed her face continuously, and then also had V-shaped triangular flaps underneath her eyes, just there.
In Mitre Square, the murderer had crossed the boundary and struck in the City of London, the financial square mile. And this meant that another police force now became officially involved in the investigation.
The Ripper crimes were investigated chiefly by two forces, and that's the City of London Police, which is responsible for the square mile, the business heart of the capital, and then the Metropolitan Police, which is referred to as Scotland Yard generally, but is the Metropolitan Police which has responsibility for the rest of London.
Although the previous murders had actually taken place on Metropolitan Police territory, the City Police were already active in the hunt to find the killer. Major Henry Smith, the acting City Police Commissioner, had given instructions that extra plainclothes detectives were to patrol the city's eastern fringes where it bordered with the East End of London. And at the exact moment when Catherine Eddowes was being murdered in Mitre Square, 3 city detectives were searching passageways just a few streets away. And yet the killer had succeeded in striking right under their noses and had then melted away into the night.
But in fairness to the police of both forces, the murderer was greatly aided by the layout of the area. In early September, Inspector Henry Moore of the Metropolitan Police's H Division had given an interview to an American journalist and had explained how the murderer's apparently miraculous escapes from the scenes of his crimes were in fact greatly assisted by the Warren-like complexity of the Whitechapel streets and alleyways.
My men formed a circle around the spot where one of the murderers took place, guarding, they thought, every entrance and approach, and within a few minutes they found 50 people inside the lines. They had come in through 2 passageways which my men could not find, and then these people never locked their doors, and the murderer has only to lift the latch at the nearest house and walk out through it and out the back way.
But with the trail from Mitre Square apparently still fresh, the City Police set off in pursuit of the killer. And this night we know exactly which direction he went in, because on this night the Whitechapel murderer left behind a clue.